do then is get going on our October meeting on forests. Welcome to everybody. This monthly meeting concentrating this month on forests, and starting with an acknowledgement of the First Nations country we're meeting on here. In my case, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Yours may well be different, but we pay respects to the elders of those nations, past, present and emerging. And we remain respectful of the care taken of our land and waters over the long years past, and our need to continue to walk together to understand this land of ours. Now, one verse from me about keeping us afloat. If you think what we do as a community group of volunteers is useful to you and to others as we work to get action on climate change, then we ask you to help us to keep doing it with a donation to Lighter Footprints via our website at lighterfootprints.org. A small regular donation is our ideal, but a one-off is of course welcome too. So thank you. That is our only message, fundraising, but and it's our only fundraising. It's that's all we do. In addition to that, we'll be directing you to the Special Forest campaign that needs financial support. So when you're wondering what you can do to save our forests, there is one very helpful answer to that, and Ray will point you to the places to go for that in our chat once we get to that point. So there's two potentials for the use of your funds tonight. Earlier tonight, we had our AGM and elected our new committee for 2020-21. It's a strong group, many of whom are familiar to you. And Lighter Footprints is in its 15th year. And with me in my 78th year, I am stepping down as convener. And I'm delighted to hand over the reins to Mick Nolan and Lynn Franks, who will be co-conveners of this group. I consider this arrangement to be an exciting next step for Lighter Footprints. I'll be here in some capacity, still wearing my founder's hat and being involved in projects, but the day-to-day work will belong to this new committee and to Lynn and Mick that head it up. Thank you to all of you out there for the personal support that you've given me over the years, which I carry with me. It's part of me. It's a wrench to make this change, but change is what we're about, and this will be a good one. Thank you all for helping to build this now strong and still growing organisation. Thanks. And on that note, let me introduce Ray Peck, whom you know largely as the coordinator of the Letter Writers Group and a very successful writer of published letters himself. He's also a long-standing supporter of work to defend our native forests and their fauna from destruction. And he has set up the session tonight to give you insight into what that fight might take. Thanks, Ray, for all that you do, and it's over to you to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Carolyn, for that introduction, and congratulations to you for setting up such an amazing organisation and your commitment. We'll talk more about that as the year progresses. I also pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation, and it's a pleasure to host tonight's event, Fight for Our Forests, and we're making a link with the Bob Brown Foundation across Bass Strait, which is particularly lovely. In 2000, the IPC estimated 1,100 gigatons, that's billion tons, of carbon is stored in forests. Amazingly, this amount is more than the carbon stored in fossil fuel reserves, about 800 gigatons, and more than the total carbon added to the atmosphere as a consequence of human activities since 1870. but forests and the amazing diversity within them are under threat. Tonight's meeting is an opportunity to hear about that threat in detail, the ongoing fight on the ground and in the courts to save them, and how we can help. So we have 4 wonderful speakers for you tonight. Our first speaker is Steve Meacher. I first met Steve on a citizen science weekend with Wildlife of the Central Highlands, or WATCH, in the Toolangi forest last year. We were in logging coops identifying tree G-bungs and habitat trees. Steve is president of Friends of the Leadbeater's Possum and a co-founder of WATCH. After the 2009 fires, Steve served on the Toolangi and Castella Community Recovery Committee, and in 2013 he was named Shire of Munindini's Citizen of the Year. Steve is actively involved in the current court case against big forests and is a passionate advocate for Victoria's forests and the endangered species within them. Thanks so much, Steve, for joining us tonight. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Ray. Can we set up slide share screen?
Yes, you should. You're a co-host, so down the bottom, when you hover over your screen, you should see share screen.
Yep. So
yes, that seems to be coming up.
So you're seeing my screen now?
I think it's still coming. It says you've started sharing.
Okay.
You need to double click on the particular window that you want to share. That's it?
Yep, there we go. That's come through now. Whoops.
Saying, you're still there.
We can see your PowerPoint presentation, but you've got a Zoom window in front of it. So maybe if you just click on your PowerPoint again, there we go.
Yeah. What I want to do is actually start it. Oh, okay. It's now saying you're screen sharing. Okay. Let's try again. Can you see that?
Yep, that's great.
Terrific. Okay, then I shall get underway. So, yes, there is Leadbeater's Possum. I've got several slides, but only 15 minutes. I'm going to go through pretty quickly. And I'm going to start by adding acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land that we're all on tonight in various places. I'm on Taungurung land here in Toolangi. And Toolangi is a Taungurung word meaning tall trees. So it's actually very apt for what we're speaking about this evening. As I say, here's Leadbeater's Possum, and you can see in the photograph here, its diagnostic feature, which is the tail, narrow at the base, broader at the tip. We describe it as being shaped like a baseball bat. And it's not progressing.
Sometimes it's a bit slow.
Yeah. So the story of Leadbeater's Possum begins in 1867 when it was described as a new species of phalanger by Sir Frederick McCoy, who was at the time the director of the Melbourne Museum, which was part of Melbourne University. And he published this description and a drawing of the animal, which was actually not drawn from life. It was based on 2 skins that had been sent into the museum. And those 2 skins were actually found in the Bass River area in West Gippsland, down near Western Port Bay. And over the next 40 or so years, only a handful, in fact, less than a handful of additional specimens were found. By the early 20th century, all the swamp forests in which those animals had been found had been drained and cleared to create farmland. And it was assumed that Leadbeater's possum was extinct. Until this young fellow came along in 1961. In 1960, Leadbeater's possum hadn't been seen for 50 years, and it was formally declared almost certainly extinct. But then Eric Wilkinson was working in the geology department at the museum, and he was also a member of the Field Naturalists Club of Victoria Mammals Group, and they were going out surveying for mammals at weekends in the forests of Victoria, not looking for Leadbeater's possums because Leadbeater's possums were assumed extinct, but in fact they were looking for greater gliders. But up near Marysville, on one evening in early April 1961, Eric saw a Leadbeater's possum. He had no evidence of it, so he and his friends returned to Melbourne, and that week he bought a new flash for his camera, went back the next weekend, and that's when this photograph was taken. This is one of the first photographs ever taken of a living Leadbeater's possum, and in the forest where it was seen, which is up near Camberville. And the story, Eric's story, was eventually published in this magazine from London, Animals Magazine. That's where I first came across Leadbeater's possum when I was 10 years old. I'll be honest, I don't remember reading this particular story, but I now have a copy of this magazine, and I certainly do remember other stories that were in this magazine. So I will have read this when I was 10 years old. I'm a bit regretful that I don't remember reading it. I would never have thought I would one day end up living on the edge of a forest like this. This is in Talangi State Forest. And this is a piece of forest that shows the sort of habitat that Leadbeater's possums require. They need three things. They need big, old, hollow-bearing trees, because that's where they build their nests, in a large hollow. It's a communal nest, so it has to be large. And you can only have a large hollow if you've got a large tree that's rotten inside. So that's the first thing they need. Without those big old hollow bearing trees, they cannot inhabit the area. They also need eucalypts with the streamers hanging on them, which is where they forage for the insects and spiders that provides the protein in their diet. They need wattles in the understory, where they feed on the sap from the wattles, which gives them their energy, the sugar. And they also need a very dense understory, because they do not go down on the ground. They must be able to move around the forest just by running from tree to tree and from branch to branch. They're very, very athletic in the way they move. So in 1961, the animal was discovered. In 1971, it was declared one of the state's faunal emblems. Okay, Leadbeater's possum, along with the bird emblem, the helmeted honeyeater. But it was very quickly realized that there were only a reasonably small number. At that time, they were probably around a maximum, maybe as many as 5,000 animals. And the reason for that is that the 1939 fires that had burned about 85% of the mountain ash forests of the Central Highlands had left a lot of dead trees, which formed the big hollow bearing trees that they live in. But the entire range was in a logging zone for Australian paper mill. Logging would be by clear felling, and the regeneration, the cycle between felling, would be on a 60-year rotation. Trees less than 100 years old do not provide the hollows, so they're not suitable for nesting. So in the 1970s, it was realized this was a recipe for the extinction of this species. So what's so bad about clear felling? Well, this is the end result of clear felling. After all the trees and all the other vegetation are removed, the waste that's left on the ground, called slash, is left for several months or maybe even a year to dry out, and then it's set fire. So the whole thing is burned. So you can imagine that Leadbeater's possum is not going to be inhabiting an area like this for at least 200 years if it's allowed to recover, which it won't be if it's on a 60 or 80-year rotation. So it was realized that a new reserve system needed to be set up to protect Leadbeater's possum. And it took over 10 years for this to be negotiated with the logging industry. It was finally declared in October 2008. And 3 months later, of course, we had the Black Saturday fires, which burned through the forests of the Central Highlands. On this map, the yellow dots show Leadbeater's possum sightings. And you can see that many of them are in the burned areas, with the exception of a small area around Talangi in the center there that we call the hole in the donut. So about a third of Talangi State Forest did not burn on Black Saturday. The fires went north of us and south of us. But this is at Lake Mountain. This is Lake Mountain Plateau, where there was a population of around 300 Leadbeater's possums, and it was entirely burned out, and that population was completely lost. The last few animals were eventually taken for their own safety into Healesville Sanctuary, where they were on display until they died in the last few years. And the fires actually invigorated the campaign because that little hole in the donut, as we called it in Talangi, was very, very special to local residents. And when logging was continuing there in 2011, the community launched a campaign. We blockaded, and that was where I actually got arrested. Ray asked for my personal involvement, so that was my arrest at Gun Barrel Coop in Talangi State Forest in 2011. Charges were eventually dropped, but also as a result of the Black Saturday fires, we believe we lost probably half the population of Leadbeater's possums in that one day. And of course, the fires that continued for several weeks, burning through the forest afterwards. So we applied for Leadbeater's possum to be upgraded from endangered to critically endangered in 2012, and it took till 2015 for that to be approved. So it became officially critically endangered, which is the last stage before extinction in the wild. So it's a pretty extreme nomination. But the important thing about the advice from the Threatened Species Scientific Committee was that they said what needs to happen is to cease timber harvesting within the ash forests of the Central Highlands. That advice, of course, has not been acted on. But in 2015, the federal government came up with an action plan for Leadbeater's possum. Unfortunately, it didn't lead to much action. We're still waiting for a new recovery plan. So over the years, there have been several legal challenges to logging in our forests, and Friends of Leadbeater's possum commenced an action in the federal court in 2017. And there's Dania and I during the case leaving the federal court. We were supported in putting the case together by Wildlife of the Central Highlands, who you heard mentioned earlier, which is a group of amazing people who go out into the forests during the night and survey for threatened wildlife, particularly in areas that are about to be logged. So these are some of the volunteers from Watch outside the court with me. Very important, they provided the foundation for our court case. Ultimately, our case was successful. As I say, it started in 2017. We got the result in May this year, and we were successful on all counts. The court found that Vic Forest's logging that they had conducted or that they planned to conduct had been unlawful in all 66 coops where we alleged it. And that had several effects. One of the most immediate was that Bunnings, who we've been campaigning to get them to stop taking Vic Forest's timber for several years, they actually made a decision at the end of June that they were going to stop stocking Vic Forest's timber. Now, the forests that we're talking about are really, really special. They've got these big old trees that we talked about earlier. They're really beautiful. got a lot of mists, and they actually harvest water out of the mist. So they're really important. It's those big old trees where the big nest is built inside a hollow. And it's not just Leadbeater's possum that inhabits these forests. They'd be in a sad state if Leadbeater's possum was the only species there. What we also have are species like the greater glider that was also included in our case and is also now listed as a threatened species. The yellow-bellied glider, the big cockatoos, the great owls. These are all animals that rely on hollows in trees for reproduction. The lyrebird, of course, is mostly living on the ground and feeding on the ground, although it does nest in tree hollows also. And is a special member there, but also these forests provide water. In fact, more than 90% of Melbourne's drinking water is coming out of the forested catchments in the mountains south of the divide, mostly. We also need our forests, as Ray mentioned earlier, to reduce the atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases to a safe level. Together with the oceanic phytoplankton, forests are the most efficient way of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bringing that level back down. So we need to protect our forests for that role. And we know that, and this is from 2007, but forestry then was listed by the IPCC as 17.4% of the problem that we need to resolve. So it's important. We also know that these forests, the mountain ash forests of the Central Highlands of Victoria, are the most carbon dense forests in the world. So when we log these forests, we're actually not just destroying their capacity to absorb carbon, but we're actually releasing the carbon that's already stored in them, which obviously at a time of climate change is not a wise thing to be doing. So thank you all very much for your interest in Leadbeater's possum. I've run through the issue very, very quickly. You will be hearing more about the court case from Dania, so I haven't gone into detail on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was really lovely getting the history. Eric Wilkinson's discovery, I wasn't aware of his name. And also the lovely animals that inhabit the Central Highlands forest as well. I'd like to now introduce our final two speakers, Jen Sanger and Jenny Webber from the Bob Brown Foundation. Jen is the campaign organiser for the Great Forest case at the Bob Brown Foundation, and Jen will provide the Tassie perspective, in particular focusing on the Great Forest case and what a win in the courts could mean for the other regional forest agreements across the country. Jenny Webber has been a defender of Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage for a number of years. She's an experienced campaign manager with the foundation and is currently focused on the campaign, in particular to save the Tarkine wilderness from logging and mining. So over to you, Jen and Jenny.
Thanks so much, Ray. Thanks for hosting such a wonderful event. I would just, before I start, would like to acknowledge the Palawa people of Tasmania, who are the traditional owners from where I am here in Tassie. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. So I'm not sure if many of you have had a chance to visit Tasmania, but our little state is home to some remarkable forests. We're still lucky to have vast stretches of old growth forests, and we have quite a lot of wilderness areas as well. We feel very special here to have this, because there's few places like this in Australia. For instance, the Tarkine region is the largest tract of temperate rainforest which is left in Australia. But not only do we have rainforests, we have some really impressive wet eucalypt forests. Like Steve mentioned, we have mountain ash forests, although here in Tasmania we call them swamp gum because we like to be different to the mainland. But the forests are like in Victoria, they're the most carbon dense forests in the world. And this is because we have the tallest trees here. So there's the tallest eucalypt trees, and we have Centurion, which grows to 100 metres tall. So these are the tallest trees in the Southern Hemisphere. So despite all these wonderful things that we have, the tallest trees, the most carbon dense forests, and these vast stretches of wilderness, our government is still hell-bent on logging these forests, and we're still seeing a lot of old growth logging here in Tasmania. This is sad for many reasons, not only because we're losing beautiful forests that take centuries to regrow, but it's also really bad news for our wildlife. As Steve mentioned, most of Australia's wildlife relies on old hollow-bearing trees for nest sites. And some of these old growth forests we have here in Tasmania, our giant trees kind of act like wildlife high-rise buildings in a sense. Some of these trees have multiple hollows in them, and some of them, the really small ones, will provide homes for smaller parrots, where some of the really big large ones will be home to giant owls as well. I'll just quickly try and share my screen with you. I'll just show you some images of some of our wildlife species, introduce you to a few of our important threatened species. So here we have the swift parrot. It is a beautiful little bird. It's critically endangered. There's probably around 1,000, 2,000 of them left. And they're actually the fastest parrot in the world. And they're unique because they're one of the few parrots in the world that actually migrate. So they spend most of their winters up on the mainland, and they come down to Tasmania during the winter time, and they nest in our hollow-bearing old-growth forests. So the tall eucalypt forests where they're nesting is unfortunately being logged at an alarming rate. Another species we have here is this impressive giant freshwater crayfish, and it really lives up to its name because it is actually the largest species of freshwater crayfish in the whole world. These beautiful creatures can grow up to about 8 kilograms in weight and can be over 80 centimetres in length. What's really special about these is, as you see in this photo, they have this beautiful blue form that only occurs in one river system in the Tarkine. They rely on clear streams for their habitat, but they also really require the headwaters, the smaller streams, to breed in. And these streams are actually really impacted by logging. So the logging actually destroys the habitat and the surrounding vegetation, but it also puts a lot of silt in the waterways, which is really detrimental for the young crayfish. Another one of our beautiful species is the masked owl. So in Tasmania, so masked owls occur all over the mainland and all over Australia, but in Tasmania, we have a separate subspecies. And it's actually a lot larger than its mainland cousins, and it's also a lot darker as well. Because they're so big, they actually require really large hollows to nest in. So it's among the oldest, biggest trees that it makes its home in. And logging is really impacting these species, not only because it's getting rid of these big, beautiful hollow-bearing trees, but it also impacts the surrounding forests, which these animals rely on to find their prey. I'm just going to stop. Oh, hang on. Okay. Stop sharing my screen. There we go. Sorry. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay. And so all of these species that I've shown you, plus a lot more, are all federally listed under the EPBC Act. So really, one of the big questions is how is Forestry Tasmania and any other of the logging corporations around the country, how are they getting away with logging threatened species habitat? And as Dania said, it's all due to these regional forest agreements, or the RFAs. So these RFAs, as Dania mentioned, are a agreement between the Commonwealth and the state governments. And basically it allows logging to take place basically been exempt from the national environmental laws. And it's actually the only extractive industry in the country that's, that is exempt from the EPBC Act. So this has allowed, especially in Tasmania, industries like Forestry Tasmania to just have an open slather and just log threatened species habitat without any check or regard. So for instance, it's really quite bad for the swift parrot at the moment. As I mentioned, it's critically endangered. And our scientists down here have stated that every single hectare of its habitat is crucial for the survival of this species. So much so that our swift parrot scientists actually approached the government and recommended that certain coops not be logged because they were so important for the parrot. But unfortunately, our state government is so negligent that it completely ignored this expert advice and just logged these areas anyway. Quite tragically, one of the sites that they logged was actually a long-term research site that had been used for 15 years. And the scientists just showed up one summer expecting to do their surveys, only to find that the place had been completely clear-felled. So it's very desperate times here in Tasmania for our wildlife, not only for the swift parrot, but for all of our threatened species. And so at the Bob Brown Foundation, we're always looking for ways that we can stop the destruction of this threatened species habitat. So when we heard about the outcome of the Leadbeater's possum case, we were really inspired to have a look at legal action. In Tasmania, we've also had another case that's similar to the Leadbeater's possum case. So in 2005, Bob Brown took Forestry Tasmania to court on the case which we called the Wailangta case. It was concentrated on a certain patch of forest on the east coast of Tasmania. And it was challenging that Forestry Tasmania were not appropriately considering threatened species like the wedge-tailed eagle, the Tasmanian devil, and a cute little stag beetle. Bob Brown ended up winning that case, but unfortunately that decision was overturned in the High Court purely for the reason that when it got put up to the High Court, the state government and the Commonwealth government actually changed the wording of the legislation. So the decision got overruled in the High Court, which was a bit of a disappointment. So considering that background, we kind of needed a different tactic for our current case. And so what we just decided to do for the Great Forest case is focus on the legal definition of the regional forest agreements. So instead of being an evidence-based case, kind of like the Leadbeater's possum case was, ours is more around the wording of the agreement. So our case is challenges the fact that the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement isn't a valid agreement. And so we're doing that on two grounds. There's big sections of the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement that aren't actually legally binding. And so in order to be a proper agreement, the agreement actually needs to be legally binding. The second point that we are going forward with too is that in the Tasmanian Regional Forest Agreement, the state government can actually change the policies, the codes, the regulations whenever they want. They don't actually have to confer with the Commonwealth government about these issues. So they pretty much have free rein to change the rules as they suit. So to summarise, our case is quite different to the Leadbeater's possums case, in that the Leadbeater's possum case was quite evidence-based. So to put it crudely, I guess, the Leadbeater's possum case was saying that logging wasn't taking place according to the rules, whereas our Great Forest case is saying that the rules aren't valid. So we're hoping that the implications for this case, if we win, are going to be quite important for Tasmania. If we win, we will put an injunction on all coops that have threatened species habitat, which at this stage covers about 90% of the logging coops in Tasmania. What that injunction would mean is that no logging can take place without federal environmental approval. We'll also put an injunction in to fix past damages as well. So all those important swift parrot coops that I mentioned before, there will have to be damages to fix those. Sorry, there'll have to be an injunction to fix those damages. So what we're hoping is that with all these injunctions, that it will put an end to the native forest logging here in Tasmania. As Victoria has shown, the injunctions are really quite a powerful tool. Also, like Victoria, logging in Tasmania is quite uneconomic. There's huge subsidies paid to it by the state government. And our injunctions will just make that process more uneconomic and will hopefully put an end to the industry. The exciting news is that our case, if successful, will have major implications for all the other RFAs around the country as well. So there's 10 of them in total, and all 10 of these RFAs have sections in them which are not legally enforceable. So our result will be significant, and hopefully, if successful, we'll see a lot of similar cases around the country following suit. So far, the case is going really well. We have put in an interlocutory injunction in to immediately protect some swift parrot habitat, because the swift parrots have started arriving from the mainland and are currently starting to nest. We put an injunction on 19 coops, which is about 850 hectares of land. And Forestry Tasmania agreed to those injunctions, so that was wonderful news. The other great news is that the court has agreed to have an urgent hearing, which means we will be in court on the 2nd and the 3rd of December. So that's only about 5 or 6 weeks away, which is really exciting. If you're interested in legal debates and following the case, all of the cases are now online because of COVID, and which is great because it means that everyday people can join the case and watch. So if you're interested in watching, shoot us an email at the Bob Brown Foundation or check out our social media pages, and we'll have links of where you can watch it online. We're hoping for a verdict quite soon. Unfortunately, the court's closed for the Christmas and January period. So we're hoping to have a verdict around February, which is really exciting. Ray, I was going to play a short video. Do I have time for a 1-minute video?
Yes, a 1 minute would be all right.
Yeah, okay, I won't be long. Hang on 2 seconds. Here we go.
We can see your Zoom screen, but we can't see the video yet.
Oh, can't you?
No. Maybe it's loading or something like that, is it?
Okay. No good?
No, we've just got the standard Zoom screen.
Okay,
sorry.
I'm very, very sorry about that.
That's
technology,
okay.
huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's happened before. Yeah. Thanks very much, Jen. That was also fascinating. We wish you luck with the Great Forest case because of the implications for the rest of the country. That would be a wonderful outcome if it was across the nation. It's hard to believe. I'm learning so much about these regional forest agreements. They sound unbelievable that they're almost virtually exempt from the national environment laws. We're getting a few questions. I want to get to the questions. Jenny, is there anything that you want to add to a little bit about the Tarkana Tarkine?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I will be. I know that we're going over time and everyone probably needs to have an evening, but I will just be brief and give you a little summary. Hi, everyone. I wanted to acknowledge the Bob Brown Foundation's work, and so great to have Jen Sanger here with us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners This is Aboriginal land that we all meet on, always was, always will be. And a special acknowledgement tonight for the Djabwurrung people yesterday who faced that distressing eviction, but all power to them for their frontline action and 50 arrests. I mean, that's what we're all about at the Bob Brown Foundation, action for Earth and taking action in whatever way we can for planet Earth. And our focus is on Australia's native forests. Today, though, I have been spending the day interviewing candidates for our new Antarctica campaign. So we do like to broaden across different places and important places that are threatened. I just wanted to start by saying that I entered into the forest activist movement when the first regional forest agreement started in 1997. And I was surrounded by elders working for the native forests of Australia saying that there needed to be a transition in 5 years. And here we are 23 years later, and we still have these notorious regional forest agreements that are super bad for the forests and for the wildlife, and they have been that entire time. The logging industry is the only industry in Australia that has an exemption from the national environment laws, and that was entirely designed by the power of the logging industry in the late 90s to do that and still have regional forest agreements around Australia that are destroying forests. Importantly, what I would really like to point out with the great work that Danya and Steve are doing, and what Danya pointed out about the EPBC Act, and I've seen some of the questions coming up to answer some of your concerns, is that the RFAs are actually a critical benchmark that demonstrate what is a problem with the plans from the Morrison government. The Morrison government is planning with their national environment laws to turn all of the environment responsibilities into the regional forest agreements. And the regional forest agreements are extraordinarily good at showing how bad that idea is, because of how we have flattened forests, endangered species, critically endangered species. And, you know, to imagine that we're dealing with greater gliders, leadbeater possums, swift parrots and koalas that are on the brink of extinction in an age of a biodiversity emergency. And meanwhile, we have a government wanting to transfer responsibility and environmental powers to the states. So that's a really nice, neat, you know, description for all of you out there, which I know are active in writing letters and keeping an eye in writing letters to the newspapers about the links between the regional forest agreements and these changes to the federal environment laws are a great one for all of you. Look, Australia's native forests are on the line. They are absolutely, once and for all, they need urgent protection. And so at the Bob Brown Foundation, we've recently launched the Australia Forest Declaration. Look, our declaration is trying to model off the New Zealand effort in 1975 when they made a declaration and had 375,000 people sign on and lobby the government to say it's once and for all time to end native forest logging. And we've modelled our declaration on that. And so we're really trying to get Australia to move into action with us at the Bob Brown Foundation and sign on to this declaration so we can present it to the Prime Minister and Anthony Albanese to force them to say, look, it's actually not good enough to hand over federal environment responsibility to the states. We want you to use Commonwealth powers to protect endangered species and the forests. However, we always have to take action in other ways, and that's what we do, and this is what this Great Forest case is about. We were truly inspired, as Jen Sanger mentioned, the moment that that decision came out of the Leadbeater's Possum case. I rang our legal team, our fantastic lawyer, Roland Brown, who's also our president, and said to him, what can we do? We absolutely modelled our effort off the fact that they had done such a great job with the Leadbeater's Possum case, and Environmental Justice Australia are just extraordinary. So look, it's just extraordinarily true that our case is that the RFA, our environmental provisions are not enforceable and are therefore invalid. And so hence logging and burning of the wildlife-filled native forest here in Tasmania is illegal. And I'd like to say that since 1997, we are now in a place to say that that is the case all over the country. And it's time, once and for all, to see all those native forests protected. And our Bob Brown Foundation campaign is protecting the Tarkine in this extraordinary wild place. And we've expanded to now take on native forests nationally. And it really isn't something new for me at the Bob Brown Foundation or for Bob Brown, as you could imagine, because, you know, we've really been wanting to work for native forests for a long time. It's just that our small organisation is now growing bigger. And so we're able to have a bit more of a a stretch outside just the Tarkine campaign. So we will continue to campaign for the Tarkine for a World Heritage listed national park and return to Aboriginal ownership. And we're broadening our efforts as well, including you know, supporting the great people all over Australia who are standing on the front line trying to protect forests. And I'd just like to say a huge thanks to all of you who I just came on into your AGM and I was so inspired to see that there's people organising for Planet Earth, for social justice, for any issues that you do cover. It's really inspiring. And absolutely, we have almost 700,000 hectares here in Tasmania that we're trying to protect. It's native forests, and we're looking forward to winning. If our Great Forest case, if we do lose, we will appeal and take it to the High Court, and that'll be the first time that a challenge to the EPBC Act will be in the High Court. We won when we took the anti-protest laws to the High Court case, and we will continue to push to whatever level of legal challenge that we can take. So the way you can support our Bob Brown Foundation is absolutely, we need more people to sign on to that declaration. We will have a great action when we reach 100,000 people. We're already up to 30,000 people, and we're going to take it to Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese that once and for all, we need forests protected. Thank you so much for having us. And, you know, sorry we've gone over time, but I just wanted to be brief. Any questions that you have, Jen and I are available at the Bob Brown Foundation. Thanks.
That's fantastic. You've done my wrap up pretty much for me, Jenny. You've pulled it all together really nicely and all off the top of your head too. So we certainly will be signing the National Forest Declaration. I'm sure we've still got 100 people who have been listening to you here, and we'll be promoting the declaration through our newsletters and emails and website as well. So hopefully we'll add several hundred to that declaration for you. And some of us will, of course, be making donations. The links have been in the chat and might appear again. We want to support your action. We want to support Environmental Justice Australia and Friends of Leadbeater's Possum. Giving money is one way. Signing declarations is another way. But also, you know, we're pretty good at writing letters and chasing things up with MPs, so we can do that as well. Look, we have gone over time. I'm really sorry to the people who have been putting up questions, but we've probably got 10 minutes where we can put some questions to our presenters. We've had Mick Nolan, who's been working hard scanning all these questions, so I'm going to hand over to him now, and he will just give us a summary perhaps of the main points that have been coming up. Over to you, Mick.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks everyone. So I think from some questions that pretty early on when Steve was talking, there was talk about protecting Central Highlands, and Bunnings had taken some stance against I think Vic Forest source timber, and as well there was mention of Nippon. How has the pressure been brought to bear on some of those commercial enterprises that's actually created change in those commercial enterprises?
Okay, is that for me, Mick?
Go for it, Steve.
Okie doke. So yeah, we've been meeting with the people at the top of these businesses over several years. In fact, the last time I met with Bunnings was 2014, and basically they were kicking the can down the road and saying, yes, well, we're watching for developments, then we'll make up our mind and so on. And as recently as the beginning of this year, when I wrote to Bunnings, they just reaffirmed that they were watching the situation and they would consider and so on. But when we got the court decision that the logging was unlawful and therefore they were potentially retailing unlawfully obtained timber, they brought things forward and dropped that. At the same time, we and other groups have written letters to the Nippon Paper Group and for their AGM in Japan this year, You may be aware that Nippon now owns the big paper mill at Maryvale in Gippsland, which has been buying pulp from Vic Forests, in fact, long before Vic Forests. It was a contract that was put into place in the 1930s when the mill was built. And it's important to point out that over 87% of the timber that comes out of the mountain ash forests of the Central Highlands actually does not go to sawn timber through Bunnings. It's actually going to pulp. In fact, the best figures we have available are from Dr. Jackie Shermer, who did a report for the state government. And in 2012, 91.7% went to wood pulp, sawdust and waste. So only 8% is going to sawn timber products. 3/4 of that is low value, things like fence posts. And the little bit that goes to what's called appearance grade, so dining tables and window frames, is less than 2% of what's being brought out of these forests. So what happens to the pulp that Australian Paper buys? Well, previously it was going into reflex paper, but they've stopped putting it into reflex paper now, but they actually combined with another group called Opal, which makes cardboard. And we don't know for sure, but we think the wood pulp is now going into cardboard, which will be much more difficult to trace. The other possibility is that they're actually burning it in their furnaces in order to boil the water that they need to process the pulp in the first place. So,
all right, I might intervene there. Thanks, Steve. That was a very comprehensive answer. So we might have time for 2 more questions, hopefully.
Yeah, so look, I think well done to all the legal people that have spoken tonight. Just, this is something we, with our strong focus on climate action, try to get the balance between engaging grassroots and public, creating for you guys, I guess, the legal pressure through raising funds and having the resources. And then Ray's already mentioned letters, which we do a lot of. If you were to sort of, maybe for the gens, were to give, a wish, a Christmas wish to lighter footprints, what would that be from us?
I might just quickly, I'll let Jen answer too, but I would actually like to say that, everyone's small action and makes into a giant big action of us all collaborating together. But one thing that Bob Brown often talks to us about at the Bob Brown Foundation is letters to the paper. And so today I was talking to him about what you guys do and about how raising all these letters to the newspapers. And he was like, that is just what I've been talking about. It's actually the truth be known, that it's about generating the conversation. And so then therefore building the momentum behind the movement and then being able to, build the movement bigger. So your contribution that you can make by writing letters. And I was informed by Ray that you're even, able to write letters to the newspapers here in Tasmania, for example, or, being able to bring our issue and the Leadbeater Possum issue into a national arena, like writing letters to the Australian Financial Review and other, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age, then makes it a more national conversation, which is absolutely what we need. And what we really have grossly underestimated is how it's time to just end native forest logging. And no matter what conversations people want to have about how long can they transition out of native forest, what about the jobs and all these sorts of things, it's just a climate and biodiversity emergency. We are all feeling it, and native forests, as has already been talked about, are so important for climate and biodiversity. So absolutely, through the Bob Brown Foundation, you can also be a part of BioBlitz, which is a citizen science project, our canopy campouts, coming to our blockades in the Tarkine. There's so many ways that we really get people actively involved. So by signing up to the foundation, there's so many ways we give you different actions. But I'll hand to Jen specifically about the case.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny. You took the words right out of my mouth, actually. I think that the letter writing that Lighter Footprints does is such a fantastic thing. It's a great way to get the message out there. In terms of supporting our case, and also to, I imagine, the Leadbeater's Possum case as well too, if you're in the position to donate, both our organisations would be more than happy to receive that support. Legal cases, unfortunately, are very, very expensive. Also too, if you aren't in that position, just spreading the news about the case, sharing the stories about the case, and then also to the National Forest Declaration as well too. If you can jump on board and sign that and share that amongst your networks, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Jen. I think we've got time for one more question, Mick, before we start wrapping up.
Yeah, look, I think the other question, we do like to have meetings. We aim to have meetings with our state MPs and with certainly with, we'll have new councillors who must, use a lot of paper and do influence the community, and then our federal MPs. So, we've covered regional forest agreements and the Environment Protection Biodiversity Act. There does seem to be, despite the legislation that's there, it's not being complied with. How would you, if we were sort of to walk into our, let's say, our state MPs tomorrow, what would be the sort of one or two things that you would think, I mean, apart from, the electorates behind us, that they would take notice of?
Okay, so I guess the big issue around native forest logging of recent times is the link with bushfires. So look, forests that have been logged burn at a higher severity than older growth forests, and so that's a really big thing that governments are listening to. As you're aware, bushfire risk is increasing, and it will under climate change. And also to the importance that our forests play in storing carbon, and also for our species wildlife habitat, which have been completely decimated by the summer's bushfires too. So I think if you do talk to your MPs, tell them about the importance of protecting forests, and mainly those 3 points: the bushfires, the carbon, and the wildlife. I think that's probably a tact I would use.
And can I add quickly in there, the economics? What we know is that these forests are worth much more in dollar terms if they are standing than they are logged. Just the water from the forests in Melbourne's catchments would be worth 25 times what is gained from logging them, mostly for wood pulp and a little bit of timber. So the economics for logging doesn't work. The jobs argument doesn't work. A few years ago, we joined with other groups, and we had a Melbourne consultancy prepare a report which showed that if we cease logging of our native forests, there would be more jobs in regenerative forestry and tourism in this area than there are currently in the native forest logging industry. And if the government actually got behind it and invested in it, that would actually increase very rapidly. So the arguments that are usually thrown at us, economics and jobs, actually favour ceasing logging with immediate effect.
Well, that's a good one, Steve. I think that we can certainly pick up on, I would like to talk to you more about that study that you just referred to. Mick, you've done a great job pulling that all together. It's my job now, I think, to formally thank our presenters and people who have been with us tonight. We've had over 200 people, I think, join us tonight, which is a good turn up. And also, I would like to thank people behind the scenes, Carolyn and Julian, who have been helping, and Carolyn introduced the meeting, but in particular, our speakers. I think it's been very interesting joining across Bass Strait. We've learned a lot about the Tassie and the Bob Brown Foundation. We can make I think strong links in the future. If we receive information about Tassie, we can work into our letter writing, for example. Yes, we do have access to all the Tasmanian newspapers, and we've already had some success getting published over there. So we'd like to build on that with your help. And thank you to the people that have put questions up. I think that, you know, the answers have been very comprehensive. Steve, we're in awe of your commitment over the years to Leadbeater's Possum. I know how passionate you are. I've seen you gave a wonderful talk at the Ada tree, that giant tree in Tulangi. I was astounded that Vic Forest were planning to log immediately opposite that, a tourist attraction, and they were going to flatten the forest in the Valley of the Giants with endangered species identified within it. And we managed to stop that, didn't we? That's all down to you and friends of Leadbeater's Possum, Steve, and Watch. It's great to see this success in the courts. It's so exciting. It's a new development and it's going from strength to strength. We're going to support you. We're going to support Environmental Justice Australia with the appeal that Vic Forests have lodged. We're going to watch that very closely. We'll be right behind that. And the Great Forest case is very exciting with its national implications. So on that note, I want to formally close the meeting. It's nearly 9 o'clock. It's been a great meeting. I think we've all learned so much. And we're going to put a blog of the meeting, we always do, up on our website with more detail and links and what have you for people who wish to follow up with letter writing and further support. So thanks again to everyone tonight. It's been a great meeting. Thank you.